For those who are not aware of what's going on in Texas, Dexerto said this, okay? I won't be very, very specific, and I say Dexerto said this. So what Dexerto say? Texas senators have unanimously passed a bill that, if signed into law, could make several games, anime, manga series illegal to own in the state. The bill bans obscene depictions of that or someone who looks like one. Okay, let's start with that. I saw this and I read the article from Dexerto. Silly me to give them clicks, but still, I read it and I started digging. Okay, I started digging. So don't make any assumptions yet until I finish the talk with you all. Okay? And Kirby fan, don't spoil things. Don't spoil things. I did digging. I did the reading. So let's get started. What they're talking about in this case, this bill, whereas technically a report on the bill, but still, for argument's sake, let's call it the bill, okay? This is the bill. It is called Texas SB 2025 to 26. This is called Senate Bill 20, for argument's sake. And the most relevant provisions that Dexerto is trying to kind of scare people with is this green underline part, okay? So let's get started. I will of course not say the very bad words out loud, but I'm sure you all can read it. I'll try and zoom in a little. Space Marine 231, hello, good evening or good morning, whichever you are, but I'm going to move on to this. So let's do a read through. We'll read together, okay? So this is in relation to the creation of criminal offenses, possession or promotion of obscene visual material appearing to depict this type of people, this type of individuals, okay? So the relevant section is here. Possession of promotion of obscene. Again, I want you all to focus on this word, obscene, okay? Please focus on this word, obscene. I'm going to run with you a few things that will give you all, hopefully, a bit of clarity on this whole situation. But let's continue first. So, promotion of obscene visual material appearing to depict those individuals. In this section, this one, self-explanatory. This is the part that a lot of people are, Dexerto and a lot of people on Twitter and online are getting very upset about, okay? A person commits an offense if the person knowingly possesses, accesses with intent to view, or promote obscene visual material containing depiction of what appears to be this type of individual. And this is the part that scared a lot of people. Regardless of whether the depiction is an image of an actual individual, a cartoon or animation, or an image created using AI or other computer software. Okay? So this was what scared a lot of people, and this was the primary fuel for the Dexerto article. So what does this bill refer to? Remember, I want you all to focus on this part as well. It is an addendum. Remember, it is an addendum. It is an addendum, so see, it's amended by adding. This is a very key word. This is a very key word in this bill. Is amended by adding, which means, I hope you all are following me. What do you think this means? I'll ask you all the question. What do you think this means when you see is amended by adding? What does this mean? Sarkana, you're correct. Exactly right. So, this Senate Bill 20 is not a standalone law. This is one thing you all have to understand. It is not a standalone law. It adds on to this. The Texas Penal Code Chapter 43. So what is the Texas Penal Code Chapter 43, you might ask? Well, this is Texas Penal Code Chapter 43, and I highlighted the key parts that relates to the new bill, the Senate Bill 20. Okay? It adds on to this. So, this is the part that is most relevant. So what is classified as an individual of such an age? So this one, straightforward. And this is an important part. An image that to a reasonable person would be virtually indistinguishable from an actual person. Remember, this is the most important part. A reasonable person would find virtually indistinguishable. The intent of Parliament is you have a drawing on one hand and you have a photo of an actual individual on the other hand. The reasonable person, which means the average individual, look at both of them and they say, they don't look very different at all. They're practically the same because they are depictions of an individual from real life of a specific age. That is one of the tests. I will go through later more. Okay? And then this one, part 3, create, adapt, and modify to be an identifiable individual of that age. In this section, it means recognizable as an actual person by the person's face, likeness, or other distinguishing characteristics. Okay, this is the most important part. This is what Senate Bill 20 is going to add towards. Okay? It's going to add towards this Penal Code Title now Offenses Against Public Order and Decency, Chapter 43. Okay? Remember that. So, with that out of the way, what is our initial takeaway? What is our initial takeaway? So this one specifically added provisions for AI. It added AI and it added computer software. And if we are going to, as reasonable people, infer what that means, it means deepfakes. Probably. It means AI generated photos. Those are the two big things. That is our initial thought. And that is the reasonable thought of most people. But in case it wasn't clear enough. In case it wasn't clear enough, okay? Remember, this one is to add on to this, all of this. And this law, this is actual law in Texas, makes very clear provisions for the whole part of indistinguishable from an actual individual. Okay? And now we will move on to the next part. Okay, let's say for argument's sake, okay? For argument's sake. Let's just make an argument. Let's say this law didn't exist at all, okay? Let's say this part didn't exist at all. Let's say the reasonable person test did not exist. and that it just meant everything, okay? Anything that even depicts someone who is presumed to be a person of a specific age, let's say for argument's sake, well, let's go towards this. Remember the Protect Act? A lot of all these Dragon Ball profile pics always talk about. These Dragon Ball profile pics think that anime characters will be reason enough for people to be arrested. That is what the Dragon Ball profile pics would think. And this law throws it and smashes it onto the ground. It is a US Supreme Court, which means it's at the highest level of the American justice system, judicial system. And long story short is this word, overbreath. You can read it on your own time, but basic story is the Protect Act talking about anime, talking about cartoons, drawings, what have you, anything that's very stylized. You can't just arrest and convict someone over that without going through what Americans would call the Miller test. And what is the Miller test? It is from the court case of Miller versus California. And it is, more specifically, Miller versus California 1973. And this is the Miller test. I'll write in a note form later on, but I want to show you all the source material first before I actually go into a proper analysis of everything, okay? This is the Miller test. So, firstly, for someone to be successfully prosecuted, charged, convicted of purveying contents of a terrible kind, it needs to pass this three-pronged test. It's the three elements of the Miller test. Whether the average person sees the material as that, whether the material depicts or describes the conduct in a clearly offensive way as applicable by, let's say, Texas law, which means we go back to this. Okay? We go back to this. And this is the indistinguishable part. And thirdly, whether the work, when considered in its entirety, lacks serious literary, artistic, political, or scientific value. And now this is the hardest. This will be the hardest thing to satisfy in most cases. All three have to be satisfied for the court to accept the prosecution's argument. In other words, to convict the person. One of these does not fit the mold, the whole thing falls apart. You are following me, lurkers? And I will agree with you on some points, Master Ops. Sometimes laws are very vague. And in this case, I will admit to you the bill from Texas that was passed, it was skirting along the lines of the Protect Act that was unconstitutional. But of course this is if you take it by its own. This whole law sounds stupid when it's taken by its own. Okay? Because this is a very sus provision because of how wide-ranging it is. But if you take it with perspective of the law in its totality, which means this one, and you recognize that it adds on to the Texas law, it limits the argument, it limits the law in its own way. So at this point, the key point is this one. Reasonable person will find virtually indistinguishable the image from an actual person. And if that is the case, I say, in my opinion, that is a fair law. None of us want any of these things happening if it's actually happening. Okay? It is important. It is important, firstly, to be for free expression, but it's also another thing to be fair and understand when certain content is over the line. And in this case, because I saw this Texas law along that complements this law, I find it to be not a problem. Not as it stands right now, at least, okay? And we'll keep going anyway. Let's just say for argument's sake, okay? For argument's sake. I want to make another argument's sake. Let's just say this entire part does not exist, okay? This entire part does not exist. Let's just say it is just this. It is just this in this whole penal code, which means that, let's say for argument's sake, you are committing a crime in Texas if you have anime. Let's go and argue. That's an argument that we will put on, okay? So, what happens then? Well, let's say someone got convicted in a Texas court for this. They had, let's say, an anime of Gurren Lagann, or maybe some anime of, I don't know. Yeah, Gurren Lagann is a good example. Let's say Gurren Lagann. He got convicted for possessing Gurren Lagann. So what next? Well, oh yeah, Haruhi as well. Yeah, Haruhi. Let's say Haruhi, Suzumiya, or Gurren Lagann. What next? Well, the person convicted can appeal to the U.S. federal court. And what's in the U.S. federal court? This one. This is the U.S. federal court equivalent of that Texas law, the Penal Code 43. Okay? And what does it say? Exactly this. Again, this identifiable person of this age means a person at the time of the visual depiction, which means someone drew a person of who actually exists, visual depiction, and this part, who is recognizable as an actual person by the person's face likeness or other distinguishing characteristics. And it also puts here part 11, which means it has to be virtually indistinguishable from from a real person according to a reasonable person or an ordinary person seeing the content. So what does this mean? Assuming this doesn't exist, a person who is convicted in Texas can appeal to a higher court, which is the U.S. federal court, and they will apply this test, which means it is quite easy for the appeal to succeed. When the appeal is done, the U.S. federal court will say, "Hey, Texas state court, you are wrong. He is not guilty of anything, I will overrule your decision, and that's the end of it. Tough luck then for Texas. But of course, that is assuming again. Assuming again this does not exist, but it does exist. Okay? Which means Texas law is still consistent with US federal law. And US federal law clearly says that a person will only be charged and convicted for the possession of such contents if first, number one, it meets this standard. That is the first part. It meets all three of this, and secondly, it meets all of this. Specifically, this one. So a prosecution would have a lot of trouble convicting a person here, okay? A lot of trouble. So, I am not an American lawyer, and I want to preface this by saying I am not an American lawyer, and I draw this tentative conclusion based on my own research. So, take that what you will, but this is my take on it, okay? You need to satisfy all of the points below. Okay? Firstly, Miller versus California, which states the three elements to meet the definition of obscene. Okay? That's the first one. You need to satisfy this one as the start. And then you need to satisfy the relevant penal code for the state. So for argument's sake, Texas, okay? Which is section... And of course, within that section, there is the key test. Understand? So, as the absolute baseline, these two have to be satisfied. It is a test within, so there are two overarching tests, and within the overarching test, there are tests within the test. So, firstly, you have to meet the definition of obscene, and second, it has to be virtually indistinguishable from a real-life person. Only then you have a proper case for this. Okay? Understand? And this is consistent with standards from many countries. I would say even by global standards, US has quite a fair legislative standard, a fair legal standard on this whole content part, okay? So, long story short, what is the long story short? Long story short, Texas Bill SB 20 just expands to deepfakes and AI photos. Basically, that is a long story short. And in other words, with that knowledge, Dexerto is full of crap. lying to your face. Dexerto, either one scenario, they didn't do the proper research, which means where is your journalistic integrity or your journalistic work ethic? Or two, they are lying to your face for hate clicks, for outrage clicks, which means they have no ethics. Whichever it is, I would not know, could be a bit of both.